So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. This one was sent to me by Arsal Ali 009050, but on the Discord and in this replay I will just be referring to him as Arsal. And this replay serves two purposes. One is obviously to show the replay that I've been given, but it's also to test out some reshade settings that I've got going on, and I think I'm happy with these. Now there is potentially problems when it comes to some of the larger scale battles, because I have enabled a couple of things which I think will be a little bit taxing when things get a little bit blobby on some of the very large fights. But to be fair, I haven't done one of Horton's scenarios in quite a while, and they were always the biggest test of whether or not a battle would crash or not, so I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem. But I think overall the colours, the brightness, things don't seem to blend into each other too badly with the settings I've got at the moment. So we'll see. I mean, over the course of this battle here, I will be determining whether or not I will be keeping these for the long term, but I think this is probably the best balance that I've managed to strike so far. So, with that in mind, taking a look at the map, I don't actually know what this map is called, but it is mostly a field battle, but it does have a bit of the mountain pass about it as well. There's this sort of little box canyon area in here where potentially the red team could retreat to should they so choose. There's a bit of raised terrain as well that they could use to their advantage, as well as some ruins that they could use for cover. Another feature of this map as well is that there is quite a lot of trees right through the middle and into the more open section of the map on the left hand side of the minimap over here, which could come into play, particularly seeing as this Runic army over here does seem to be wanting to move over to link up with his allies, potentially go onto the slightly higher ground and adopt a more defensive posture, which does mean that the trees probably won't come into play too much as far as an obstruction for the battle itself, because I think Dale is going to be able to occupy this space without too much of a fight from Rune, unless they've got some hidden ambush units in there, which I can't currently see. There's a river in the background, which again won't come into play too much because that's right on the red line. And yeah, so we have also, it's going to be a good versus evil battle, which is always quite popular. We have the elves flanked by two of their allies from the Kingdoms of Men in Dale and Arthedain on either side, and then we have the forces of evil. So I think we have two Misty Mountains armies and one army from the Easterlings of Rune. There's a few players as well which I think are slightly newer, at least I haven't seen them in any replays, so we'll see. It should be a battle where all of the players are of a similar skill level anyway. It's not as if we've got veterans in here that are just going to roll over slightly newer players. I think we should be seeing a fairly competitive match indeed, just shy of 20k frames as well. So I think we'll go through the blue team first of all, seeing as they are probably going to be the ones that may have to take the slightly more aggressive stance here. I mean, certainly they all have, well, Arthedain, Imladris and Dale, even if Imladris and probably the least archer focused of all of the Elven factions, all of them are capable of bringing some very, very potent archer lines. So it depends. I mean, the red team could try and retreat back a little bit further, use the terrain to their advantage, use their cheaper archers to try and blunt the effectiveness of all of the more expensive skirmishers from the good factions in this particular battle, but we shall see. We'll start off with Locomotive, who is going to be, or Loki Motive as it were. So he's going to be playing as Arthedain, of course. We've got a couple of units of EVENDIM archers here on the front, which overall, in a very similar vein to the Ramus Equal Garrison archers from Gondor, I find them to be a very fine low tier archer indeed, particularly in 0.96.1 where cheaper archers tend to be very easy to get cost efficiency with. That will change of course in 0.97 where cheaper archers will be made. The quality will be more noticeable on the higher tier archers. Units like this cannot be simply used to sort of shoot and trade evenly with some of the more expensive armoured archers anymore. But overall, they do have a shield value. In spite of the fact that they are wearing shorts, they will be able to withstand a little bit of skirmish fire more so than other archers of a similar tier because of that shield value, and of course, you know, they can be used to sort of augment the effectiveness of Arthedain's overall skirmish line, which is often pretty potent indeed. Although in this case I think he's gone for a slightly different approach. He's got a couple of units of Arthedain marksmen as well, which of course again slightly more heavily armoured, slightly more damage, a few less men in the unit, which can affect the effectiveness of the unit quite a lot in 0.96.1, but again it's still a good line archer unit, and certainly against the Misty Mountains Arthedain can count on having a very distinct archer advantage, even if they only go for the slightly cheaper options like this. And then just in behind, sort of preventing the frontal cavalry assault, even if there is some stakes deployed in front of them, We do have just in behind a few units of the Arthedain pikemen with the armour upgrades as well, so they do have their breastplate, which will make them slightly more resilient against arrow fire, even if, of course, that is still going to be their primary weakness. But also in melee, it will make them just that little bit tougher. And of course, the Misty Mountains do not have access to pikes of their own; they only have access to halberds. So the pikes can count on having a good ranged advantage in melee, as long as they don't get buckled, as long as their phalanx remain strong, which Arthedain, of course, often will be relying on units like this to hold the front line. They should be in a pretty good way here. And then backing them up, we have a couple of units of the Dunedain Peacekeepers. Sort of make a note of these guys because they will no longer be spearmen in 0.97. They will be trading in their spears for one-handed axes instead, which overall I think is a very good thing for Arthedain because they already have plenty of access to anti-cavalry polearm options in their pikes and also their armoured spearmen and also a few other units as well. But the Dunedain Peacekeepers becoming an axe unit will give them access to a much more damaging and even skillful line infantry unit that can do quite a lot of damage as well, because obviously Dunedain share a little bit in common with the elves in that they trade in more of their armour value for a little bit more melee skill, which I think is overall going to be a very, very good thing for Arthedain going forward. They will of course be just as expensive as they are now. You do pay quite a bit to have some Dunedain units in your army, but overall I think a very good thing potentially for Arthedain in the future. But for here, of course, as spears, they're quite similar to the heavy elven spears, only not quite as effective, so they should be able to do a pretty decent job against all of the basic goblin units. It'll take something a little bit more serious like the Black Uruks to actually be able to trade efficiently with the Dunedain Peacekeepers, and even if they do, they've also brought some heavy swordsmen of their own along, so they've got the dismounted Fornoster Rain Knights, which of course have got some pretty good armour values of their own, good skill, good damage values. They're going to be able to carve their way through most of what the Misty Mountains has. Infantry-wise, of course, it's going to be a case of numbers that the Misty Mountains is going to try and use to overwhelm the stronger Arthedain infantry like this. And they also have some siege. They've also got a ballista, which is an interesting choice. I mean, certainly the red team I think is going to be forced into making a choice of whether to be very aggressive early on or whether to try and retreat and try and take the edge off these skirmishes, because Arthedain has certainly got a very strong ranged contingent here, and I can't imagine the Misty Mountains is going to be able to beat back all of these Arthedain archers in addition to the ballista as well. We shall see though. And naturally, as it's Arthedain, they have a little bit of cavalry. Both of them, however, are lancers. We have the Fornoster Rain Knights, which are basically just the standard lancers. They're not multiple HP. They have decent armour and shield value though, and obviously their charges can be pretty effective as well. And then we have the slightly... They look exactly the same, which of course will not be the case in 0.97 as well. The Royal Courthouse Armlaith will be given their own model, which looks very, very nice. A little bit more similar perhaps to the Knights of Illuminus to sort of denote their position as a general's bodyguard unit. That is where the general is going to be after all. Lancers are an interesting choice, however, because the Misty Mountains has got access to plenty of anti-cavalry options that can deal with lancers fairly easily. Wargs, obviously, first and foremost. But they can also zone out cavalry with their armour-piercing spears and halberds and their crossbows, of course. But the Royal Courthouse Armlaith is still something that the Misty Mountains has to be careful of, because obviously one good charge from lancers can cause a huge amount of damage, particularly to the more fragile units in the Orc rosters. Now, we shall move on to Arsal, who is going to be playing as Imladris here in the centre, flanked by his two Kingdoms of Men allies. He's got some Eldarenway Harumairo on the flank, which again, they are lancers. Now, they are, obviously, as elves, they do have the slightly heightened skill, the defensive skill values that you would expect from them, but it's still not the sort of thing you want to send into wargs, because if they do get a good charge off against wargs, they could probably defeat them, but it's not going to be cost effective. The Harumairo are very expensive, and you really want to be using them on the right targets, but they do have a good shield value as well, and good armour, as most of Imladris' roster does tend to have, although we do have some Eldar Quinga here on the front without the armour upgrades, which does mean, of course, that they could be a little bit more susceptible to being skirmished down, but even so, these are Elven archers, so they have, I think, a missile attack of 6, which is very, very good. Usually, only the slightly stronger human archers can match that, and this is the entry level Imladris archer, of course, so the Eldar Quinga is going to be on the front line. Good accuracy, good damage, and of course the Noritano warrior is very, very similar, only slightly stronger in melee. And then just in behind them, just like over with the Arthedain army, they're backing them up with some anti-cavalry polearms just in case they receive a frontal charge. The Eldar Atar, which, again, I've never really been the biggest fan of them. Ever since they were the Linden Long Spears in Standard Third Age, I've never really found them worthwhile bringing, but maybe they can prove me wrong here. They are without the armour upgrade again, which makes them look a lot nicer, I must say. But, it does still offer them a good anti-cavalry tool to prevent the wargs from simply sweeping in and charging down these high-value Elven archers. And then just in behind, he's gone for more quality in his infantry, which of course is Imladris. You're going to see quite a lot of, again though, the Imladris Guardians are without the armour upgrade, which does make them a little bit more fragile. But overall, the Imladris Guardians, I think, are probably the strongest line infantry that you can actually use as a viable front line. You can obviously... It's very difficult to bring sort of General's Bodyguard tier units to the extent you need to sort of cover a whole front line, whereas you can do that with Imladris Guardians. It's very expensive, but it can be done. And Imladris, of course, is what they're all about, a lot of strength in melee. And then we have a couple of units of Imladris Sentries as well, so that's more strength on the front line. It's more pikes as well, which the Misty Mountains across the way are going to find it very difficult to deal with. Rune, of course, do not have access to pikes either, so it does make a good deal of sense here that both Arthedain and Imladris have gone for the pikes. And then finally, excuse me, we have the General's Bodyguard, which of course is the Gwythi Rockdor, which Knights, and again, Knights are something which can take on wargs. Now I would say that the Bolgs Champions are still not the sort of target the Gwythi Rockdor want to be charging into recklessly, but even so, the Imladris Knights, some of the strongest Knights in the game, in 0.97 I believe they are just definitively the strongest Knights in the game. So they'll be able to sort of roam around the battlefield doing a lot of damage. We also have some Noriterno cavalry as well over here, which are slightly more bread and butter lancers. They won't do the same sort of damage as the Harumira or the Gwythi Rockdor, but it's still an armor-piercing charge on these guys. You do need to look after them a little bit more though, lightly armoured, not a shield, so they can be zoned out by archers fairly easily if you leave them hanging around near the enemy lines for too long. And then finally, we have Sam Hedgnen, I'm just going to call him Sam. We have Dale, and he's got a couple of units here at Barding Herd on the flank. Armor piercing, obviously they are halberds, they're very tanky halberds as well. Shield value, heavy lamellar armor, and overall, not a bad choice to bring. Again, the Misty Mountains and Rune both have their fair share of decently armoured units, and the Barding Herd, as we've seen time and time again in the past, make a very strong centre to the Dalian army. On the front line we have several units of the Lake Town Bowmen, which of course are cheap and cheerful archers, much in the same way the EVENDIM archers and the Arthedain marksmen over on the other side. Their primary objective here is just going to be skirmishing with the enemy, and in the upcoming 0.97 patch the Lake Town Bowmen will be combined with the Lake Town Infantry, so they will be a hybrid of both of the two units, not losing a great deal of effectiveness from both, so they will still have the ability to be a basic line archer and then basic line infantry, which is I think going to be a pretty important step, well, a pretty important step up for Dale anyway. I feel as though Dale, they're not a million miles away from being very good in 0.96.1. I've seen them used very effectively, but I do feel as though some of the changes coming in 0.97 make Dale a more well-rounded faction. It certainly plays into their sort of main strength of obviously being a very skirmish and archer-centric faction. But the Lake Town Bowmen here are just going to be going in, doing their bit to try and wear down potentially the Runic skirmishers. There's some civilians over here, which of course civilians, if you've got a bit of spare money, if you've got like 100 or 150 florins left over that you don't really want to spend on armour upgrades, why not bring some civilians? They'll bring their shovels and pitchforks to the battle and fight and die for you. And then we've got a couple of units of Bardian marksmen, which obviously, overall, as a more heavily armoured archer, even in 0.96.1, where such a thing is not really as effective as it really should be, the Bardian marksmen still are very, very strong, alongside the Abrazanim Nadubawi from Umbar, as I've said before. I find the Bardian marksmen to still be very effective. They are without their armour upgrade here, which makes them a little bit more fragile again, but ultimately it's not really going to matter. With this sort of skirmish force, Dale can reasonably expect to be able to go blow for blow with Rune and ultimately win in the long run when it comes to their archers, as you would expect from Dale. Some Dalian cavalry here as well. So again, fast-moving lancers, they do have a shield. Need to be a little bit careful though, obviously they don't want to be caught up in anti-cavalry things for too long. Lancers, it's all about how much you can keep them moving, how quickly you can cycle them out of enemies. Obviously they want to steer well clear of the wargs, but they are quick enough to do so. And then back here, again, not too surprised to see a lot of pikes again, because once again, Rune don't have an answer to them in melee really. The range of the Lake Town pikemen can be very good, but the Lake Town pikes are ultimately cheaper, not going to be as strong as the upgraded Arthedain pikes, and certainly not as the Imladris sentries. So, there is a trade-off there. You can have more of them, but they are obviously of less quality than the Arthedain and Imladris equivalents. Some Lake Town infantry, of course, as I've said, they're going to be combined with the Lake Town Bowmen in the upcoming patch. A lot of Lake Town units here today, so Dale's certainly going for a little bit more of a quantity approach, maybe to offset the fact that they have an Elven ally who's gone very quality heavy, which is good. And then we've got a couple of units of Earls of Escaroth and another unit of Lake Town pikemen back here. The Earls of Escaroth, of course, are very strong line infantry unit indeed, very heavily armoured, going to be able to stick around on the front line for a long, long time. It's a strange place to put your general, though, with a unit of just random Lake Town pikes here at the back. But even so, he's far enough back to the point where he won't really be shot to death, and obviously as he's in a pike unit, he's not really going... A charge could happen, but it's very risky on the part of the red team if they try and assassinate the general like that, because obviously cavalry don't mix well with pikes, naturally. So we have Aroma the Great, who is going to be playing as Rune. He does have a fairly substantial car force of a couple of units to look at in Rim. In Rim are, again, one of those units which it is quite difficult to use the Innis Rim, I think, because they are heavy cataphract units. They're maybe not as swift as some other Lancers. They don't have a shield either, so they are a little bit vulnerable in that respect, even if their armour is very, very good. And they're not multiple HP, so you do need to be careful, but they are still Lancers, so they are still capable of dishing out a high amount of damage on the charge, especially seeing as there's a lot of Lake Town units across the way. They could potentially be very, very useful in this fight. Just over here we can see also some Scion Rim, which obviously the Scion Rim, the heavy Runic spears, all of the Loka units in the sort of the centre of the Runic line, the Golden Boys as they're called. The Scion Rim are the most expensive, even though they dish out the least amount of damage overall, as they are spears, but they are very, very tanky, even with, you know, they're not multiple HP, but it can sometimes feel like it when they get dug in, because they're very difficult to wear down without the appropriate tools to do so. And they are back there. We also have some Nar Rim, which obviously as far as archers go, pretty good, pretty damaging. You see the Variag mercenaries more often in 0.96.1 because of their ability to skirmish more effectively, but even so, nice to see more golden armour. We've got some E-Strong crossbows with the armour upgrade. The crossbows, something which all of the red team can certainly bring to bear in this battle. They're going to need it, I think, against the Imladris infantry in particular. The stopping power and armour piercing of the E-Strong crossbows and potentially the heavy goblin crossbows could be very, very handy. There's a lot of E-Strong warriors here with the armour upgrade as well, some Baltroth tribesmen, very mixed in all of this army. The E-Strong warriors, of course, much like the clansmen, only instead of a shield they have another sword, so they are actually pretty decent in melee for what they cost, but they're obviously hideously vulnerable to arrows. Even with the armour upgrade, the lack of a shield really will hurt them. We've got some Flagrim as well, so that's some AP on the front line, obviously the heart and soul of most Runic armies. Most people will even bring them even when they're faced with a lightly armoured faction, which is a mistake, but in this case, certainly not a mistake. All of the factions that they are up against will have access to some pretty nice armoured units. And then finally, the Carmel's Chosen, which is going to be the General's Bodyguard, multiple HP, heavy infantry, which is a fairly safe place to put him in this battle, I think. As long as they can defend him and get the spears and the crossbows all around him, he's probably not going to be charged into, and a unit like that is going to be important for helping to hold down the front line engagement. So, now we shall move on. There is a purpose to why I'm sort of taking my time over this, and it's to sort of get in close to the unit models and sort of see if the reshade is as I like it, which I think it is so far. I think it's looking good. We have Vayner, Doge of Venice, who is playing as the first of the Misty Mountains armies. We have the Wargs, of course, as I've said before. Very, very good anti-cavalry tool. They have very low defensive skill, however, and very low armour, so once their multiple HP is gone, they're very easy to kill. However, if you get them in early against enemy cavalry, they're going to do a lot of damage. That is their primary purpose. And you see them used defensively quite a lot for those purposes. Some Snow Trolls, which again, I think they're going to be quite important for helping to deal with Imladris, because Trolls are one of those unit types which can deal damage to even strong Elven infantry units. Now, Trolls will tend to melt away under pressure quite quickly if you don't support them, so Vayner is going to have to be wary of that. We've got more Warg Riders, and then the central line over here, obviously we have a ton of heavy goblin spears, backed up by some crossbows. Again, the crossbow is going to be very, very important to be used correctly in this fight, if they are to stand much of a chance, I think, because I think the blue team have certainly got the advantage at range and potentially in melee as well. It's how they support these heavy goblins, which I think is going to be the important thing here. Obviously, numbers-wise as well, the Misty Mountains has got a fairly substantial advantage. I thought we had missed a bit of this army, and indeed we did. We've got some White Uruk Fearmongers again, potentially quite useful, provided they avoid going head-to-head with the Pikes. The Black Uruks of the Mountains, which are going to be important, because again, they are pretty much the exception to the rule for most of the standard Misty Mountains army, in that they do actually have some pretty decent skill. They're not just garbage, they can help hold your line together. You can't expect these heavy swordsmen to work miracles. They're certainly not up to the sort of level as human heavy swordsmen or elven heavy swordsmen, but they will still do a decent job, and against basic line infantry they can come out victorious as well. And then some Goblin King Bodyguard, which is where Vayner's general is going to be. And then finally, as I'm sure you saw already, we have Corrigan, who's going to be playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. He's got his Blackback Berserkers back here, which is his general. Blackback Berserkers capable of dealing damage to anything. Even if they don't necessarily win, they will still leave their mark. A couple of units of crossbows as well. Halberds, which is good to see. Obviously good for dealing with enemy cavalry. Good for holding down the front line under most situations, and we'll see how they do here against all the pikes though. Heavy Goblin Archers, Heavy Goblin Archers. This is actually the first of the armies on the red team I've seen which has gone for a little bit more of a heavy skirmish presence in terms of numbers, which may very well end up playing into their favour. But we'll see, because I think Arthedain are probably the best prepared for this sort of thing, along with Dale. If that was against Imladris, maybe it would have been a little bit better for them. More halberds, a lot more spears, which obviously in 0.96.1 the spears are very effective. You won't see a Misty Mountains army without them. some White Eric Fearmongers, and then finally the Volks Champions. Very, very important to use the Volks Champions correctly in this matchup, I feel, because all of the opposing teams has got some pretty nasty cavalry units that they could potentially use to their advantage. So, without further ado, let's begin. And it's going to be interesting to see how this starts off. I don't think, actually, the Misty Mountains army and the Arthedain army have got in range of one another because of the quality of their various archers. We have some Goblin infantry which is immediately starting to move towards the enemy lines. I would advise against this. Even a unit that you have for free, like this Goblin infantry, still has its uses, and if you just feed them into the enemy, then they're not going to have their uses so much. So it's definitely the sort of thing which you can use cavalry against very, very quickly. However, if he's sending them forward to try and absorb arrow fire, then that is quite a shrewd move. Try and take away some of that Arthedain ammunition. But that's certainly playing the long game, and I don't know if the Misty Mountains can afford to play the long game too much. As you can see over here, already the heavy goblin crossbowmen coming under fire from the elven archers. The Eldark Winger are in range, obviously, the elves with their slightly stronger range. The crossbows are going to need to get out of there because, again, the Misty Mountains are going to be leaning on them quite heavily to try and equalise any fights they get into, I feel. The wargs are coming forward. Now this is a very bold move indeed if he comes forward with his trolls and his wargs. He needs to hope that this pays off quickly. You can see that Rune are moving in to sort of reinforce their allies. In fact, Arthedain is starting to move to the side as well. Although I think it's actually time we move down to half speed already here because things are starting to kick off. The wargs and trolls, I think rightly so now, are going to sort of start to move behind the hill because if they get shot up too badly by the elven archers, the wargs are going to be gone, and that is going to allow the very deadly looking Imladris cavalry to start moving as well. Dale are also starting to move across from the side over there. Interesting movements over here from Arthedain, I must say, but yeah, this is exactly what I thought was going to happen. Loki Motive has definitely got the right idea here. You can see that the Goblin infantry are coming forward. If they were simply being used to try and absorb arrow fire, that's not a bad idea. The problem that they do have, however, is it's going to take 1 or 2 cavalry charges from the Royal Court of House Armley to do grievous, grievous damage. Although, to be fair, Loki Motive not going to be able to get up to charge speed here. They're just going to have to walk into melee with the Goblin infantry. Now, to be fair, it's Goblin infantry. You know, this cavalry, even if it doesn't get a charge off, is going to be able to very easily kill off the goblins. But he has managed to blob up the cavalry, and he's trying to shoot in there. So, interesting ideas. That's a lot of arrows coming in as well. But again, it's all basic arrows, I think. I don't think there's any crossbows there. It's just sort of standard arrows. If, you know, when their backs are turned, he could kill off a few of the standard Fornoster Rain Knights because they're not multiple HP. So overall, not a terrible engagement this, but I think, yeah, we're going to go down to half speed once again because things are starting to kick off. I'm actually surprised that Arthedain is moving over to Imladris. With all of their archers, I was thinking that they would try and sort of keep the Misty Mountains hemmed in for as long as possible, try and keep them skirmishing. As it is, however, this is going to allow Corrigan to potentially wrap around and start hitting Arthedain as they try and move over and support. Now the Goblin infantry are charging. We've also got a few units of heavy Goblin spears as well. Now this is an interesting engagement already. What have we got over here? Noratirno cavalry are moving out to the flank. Now this will be the litmus test of the Eldar Atar, because they're going to need to hold the front line. Now the Imladris Guardians can move in support very quickly. I think that Vayner, however, has overextended a little bit. You can see that those heavy Goblin crossbows are also being charged immediately by the Fornoster Rain Knights. Now the Fornoster Rain Knights going to be able to take a sizable chunk out of the heavy Goblin crossbows, but it could cost them their lives here because they are going to be charged down by Warg Riders, which basic Lancers like the Knights here are they're exactly the sort of thing that Wargs like going up against. So trading half a crossbow unit for an entire unit of Arthedain cavalry is probably worth it in the long run, but the crossbows do need to get out of there. In fact, it's not even half that crossbow unit. They actually took that charge like champs. However, we can see here that there are these heavy Goblin spears in their big blocks of shield wall trying to push their way through the Eldar Atar, but the problem that they will have, I think actually that with the support of the Goblin infantry, with the numbers, they could crack this formation and do a lot of damage to the Eldar Atar, but the problem is the Imladris Guardians are so close by in reinforcements that as soon as they get in there, the heavy Goblin spears are going to be so outmatched, it's unbelievable. You can see over here that the Noratirno cavalry that pulled out wide is now rear charging, which is going to do a lot of damage, and obviously the Goblins, without any sort of morale buffing units nearby, this is the sort of thing which can immediately make them think about routing, and the heavy Goblin spears are already shaken. The Noratirno cavalry is going to cycle them out of there. The Wargs are coming over here. Now the Wargs are close to all of these archers, but honestly I think that the Wargs should keep going. They need to try and defend their front line here. More and more units are coming forward. We see some Snaga coming through the trees. The Black Uruks are also coming forward. But the time has come, I think, now. They need to start being very aggressive here. The Royal Courthouse Armlate has lost a few models. Did the Fornoster Rain Knights manage to survive? They did. but they're a little bit worse for wear now. But Arthurlane is sort of guarding the flank. It's going to be up to Corrigan here, I think. Corrigan needs to move in quickly and start hitting the side of Arthurlane, because he can wrap around and he can put some real pressure on the back lines. The battlefield, for being so wide and for being, well, so potentially wide anyway, it's actually gotten narrower as the fight has gone on, because you can see that Dale is having to move across as well, because Rune are now coming up behind Vaner's army. The Snaga skirmishers are in position. Now, how well they can use their ammunition may well affect quite a bit. They have a good shot there onto the Elven pikemen, which they should certainly take if they are able, but you can see here that there are several portions of the Goblin army which are retreating. They're not actually breaking. I thought those Goblin infantry were breaking. They're just retreating. Here comes the Snaga skirmishers. They're actually going after the Arthurlane pikemen, which again, they're firing at pikes, which is good. You can see the heavy Goblin crossbows are coming in here, so a combination of the crossbows and the Snaga going to be able to do a lot of damage to Locomotive's front line here. And this could be the gap that Corrigan needs to start putting pressure on the side of this front line. Rune needs to get up here pretty quickly, however. What have we got over here? The Wargs are just sort of hanging out. There are some Noriterno cavalry in the back there. The Gwaithir Rockdor, the Grey Company are also there, so that was a unit of Arthurlane's that was hidden. The Grey Company, of course, are mounted Dunedain Rangers, effectively. And Ladra sentries coming to the front line, but yeah, this frontal assault from the Misty Mountains, it wasn't really ready. I feel as though if Vaner was going to do this, what they should have done was maybe come in when they were a little bit more set, had a little bit more support from Rune, potentially. But as it is, their heavy Goblin spears are still standing firm. I mean, the Eldar 8 are not killing them quickly, so that might be their saving grace. The Noriterno cavalry, meanwhile, have been clipped by this unit of Warg, so they're going to lose a few unit models. They're going to try and charge into the Snow Trolls. Now, if this was the Knights, a lot of the Snow Trolls would probably actually be skewered with that really heavy charge bonus of 20. But with the Noriterno cavalry, I don't think their charge bonus is going to be enough to actually kill off the Snow Trolls, and that could be enough to actually finish this Noriterno cavalry off. It could be enough to break them, certainly, where they're being attacked essentially by Wargs and Trolls at this point in time, which is not ideal for them. We can see that the Golden Legions from Rune are also pouring down over the hills just in behind. Dale have also moved over. I mean, Dale at this point, I'm surprised that they haven't sort of moved around to try and attack Rune in the side, set up their army over here, maybe potentially go up on and try and contest this hill, this raised ground. The Dalian cavalry is going into the backfield, which at the very least will pressure, which is good. But Dale can sort of move in and start applying pressure themselves, because Corrigan is doing that on this side. They are moving in all of these archers. They may only be Goblin archers and heavy Goblin archers, but it's a lot of arrows that are being poured down range, and you can see that this unit of pikes over here has been the target of an awful lot of range fire so far. A lot of damage done to them. However, this unit of Black Uruks from Vaner has certainly taken the vanguard in this battle, and this army is going to be the one that's suffering most for it. I don't think that the army is going to be holding together too strongly unless Corrigan and the Runic player, who I forget the name of, Aroma the Great, comes forward in support. You can see that both Vaner's Black Uruks, the mountains, are coming in, but charging headlong into pikes is not ideal for them, because this unit of pikemen is still strong enough to sort of withstand this assault. This one over here maybe less so, especially with the support of the White Uruk Fearmongers close by. And you can see over here the Wargs charging right into the front. That was maybe not the best idea either. They charged right into the Eldar 8R and the Imladra sentries. So that's two units which are basically tailor-made for killing cavalry should they get close. And they're doing the business there. The Snow Trolls are on the way over. But you can see how resilient the Heavy Goblin Spears are, even though we have been on essentially half speed for quite a while. We'll go up to full speed now, actually. They are holding their ground. They will lose this fight in the long run, but they're surviving. Whether or not the red team are going to be able to do anything about that in the long run, I'm not sure. It's good to see that Dale are sort of getting into a position where they're going to sort of prepare to try and come down this line, because I feel as though if Dale do that in force with all of the numbers they have available to them, with all of the archers as well, it could be pretty devastating. So Rune, despite their best efforts, they're going to have to try and stop the advance of Dale with something. The Flag Grim are coming forward. There are also Snow Trolls. You can see in the background there the Grey Company alongside the Elven Knights that are the Gwaithir Rockdor. These Snaga skirmishers are still standing their ground, and a few of them have died, which does indicate that they are now being targeted. But if they were being targeted since they were here, they would have been long dead by now. So all of these javelins must have been having an impact somewhere. And the Elven front line is maybe not looking as strong as it otherwise would. Once again, we can see that Rune charging headlong into the Dalian phalanx, the Lake Town pikemen in position, ready to take this charge. That, I think, has been the problem that the red team have had, and it's something which I did touch upon during the compositions, the fact that there are so many pikes and none of these factions for the red team really have something which can tackle pikes head on. You know, these Flagrim are going into the front line, and of course the Flagrim, if they can break the phalanx, will easily beat Lake Town pikemen, but if that phalanx can remain strong with the support of this Lake Town infantry, the Flagrim are just going to be sort of impotently swinging their maces while they're out of range, which is not good for them. The Eldar Quinga are still here in position, of course. We can see in the backfield the Narim are getting in position, trying to offer some skirmish fire of their own. The Snow Trolls are back here as well. What's Corrigan doing? Again, I feel as though they need to be quicker, the red team. I think that this Misty Mountains army from Corrigan over here has been far too slow. Again, even if you want to be a little bit, even if you want to take your time a little bit more, you know, Vaynor was the one who made the choice to sort of move in very aggressively. You need to support your ally if they do that. And Vaynor's actually had some success in places. I mean, if you look over here, if Corrigan was willing to come forward and support this assault, they could quite easily break Arthedain's army and then start working up the Imladris line, which I think they sorely need to at this point. Because Rune and, you know, the arrival of the Dalian legions from Esgaroth, it's not looking good. Particularly led by this knight, this charge of the knights. It's going to allow Dalian infantry to move forward. It's going to allow... Actually, let's go down to house speed. It's going to allow the Dalian archers to get in position and start shooting right along the formations. In the backfield over here, we do have a bit of a cavalry engagement. However, it is between two lance units. But we do have the Grey Company moving over here in support. And I think that is ultimately why the Runic forces are losing this fight. The Dalian cavalry are going to be able to defeat the Innas Rim, which I don't think under normal circumstances that would be true. I think the Innas Rim with their armour values should be able to defeat the Dalian cavalry 1-to-1. I might be wrong about that, but even so, it's a fight that's gone in the Dalian cavalry's favour to such an extent that, you know, they must have had help from somewhere. But the Dalian cavalry, they're going to be victorious here. The Runic cavalry lies in ruins, and with the Grey Company in the backfield as well, this is going to leave the door open for this Dalian cav and the mounted rangers to start attacking the rear lines. What have we got over here? We've got a couple of units of Shadow Guard. That's good AP troops, that. We also have the Balchoth tribesmen, so that's more javelins, more archers. We have the Warg Riders and the Snow Trolls moving away, but you can see that over on this side, victory is going to be... Yeah, it's certainly going to be in the favour of Imladris and Dale. The Lake Town River Patrol in support as well, so they came out of hiding. And you can see that the Lake Town infantry is starting to wrap up the lines of the Flagrim. The Flagrim obviously far stronger individually than any of these men from the Lake Town, but they are horribly outnumbered, and also with the Gwythi Rockdoor buzzing around their lines as well. It's not looking good for them. Not looking good at all. In fact, a lot of the Runic infantry has come over here now, which... Again, it leads me to question why the Runic player wanted to move over to this position in the first place. I mean, he may have thought that maybe this was a sort of better position to face Dale in, but all he's ultimately done is allowed Dale to get his archers up onto a piece of raised terrain to shoot right down into his units as they move forward. Again, if the purpose of Rune was to come over here to help the Misty Mountains, I was expecting a very strong push towards Imladris and Arthedain, which ultimately has not materialised. You can see the Scion Rim are moving around the flanks, but again, as I said during the compositions, the Eastron Warriors, their primary weakness is archers, and also they're being sent into a melee fight where they really have no business being. The Barding Herd are going to be able to hold their ground very, very easily, even if the Lake Town bowmen are not accurate enough to actually miss the heads of their own men. Good thing they're wearing those helmets. More Flagrim again, the Flagrim are returning, but Rune's infantry has had a pretty torrid time of it. Dale certainly had it all their own way thus far. More Nar Rim fire coming in, more Balchoth tribesmen. Here come the Wargs. The Trolls are coming in here, and they're actually chasing after the Gwythi Rockdoor, and they do manage to get into melee with them. That's pretty impressive. Again, the Elven line is thin enough to the point where this is always going to be a problem, potentially. If you go very quality heavy with the Elves, you're obviously going to have fewer men in the army. That means less mass. That means units like Trolls are going to be able to go through your line a little bit more easily, even if when they do get into melee, the Trolls are not going to be able to kill off quite as many units. High quality units can deal with Trolls pretty quickly after all. The Eldar Atar, however, are going to be in a bit of trouble. The Noritano cavalry coming in. That's a nice charge there onto that one troll to bring him down. It's not often you see a troll go flying, but there it is. Snow Troll's doing some good damage there to the Eldar Atar. So let's see what the status of Vaynor's army is. They've got some Blackback Berserkers on the front line. Seems to have come to a standstill over here a little bit, but Vaynor is actually winning this fight. And you can see that Arthedain's infantry is now pretty much in full retreat. Corrigan has still got infantry in reserve as well. They're pulling out really wide actually, so they're really trying to sort of have the Pac-Man effect, where they can sort of munch down with both their jaws onto this section of the line. which they do need to. I don't think they're winning on this front to the extent that they need to be, considering Dale is really dominating over on the other front with the support of Imladris against Rune. But still, this is good news for the red team, because it does mean that they are at least being able to push back against some of this aggression. We can see the Snaga skirmishers are in position. Let's go back up to 1 speed. I think we've had enough of half speed for this battle, for now anyway.
Only half the enemy force remains.
And you can still see here, the heavy goblin spears are still holding their ground. Again, the fact that they're being supported by trolls and by Snaga is the reason why they haven't fallen apart yet. But even so, you know, against Imladris Guardians and Eldar Atar, the heavy goblin spears, when they're in formation, have held up for a while. As soon as I say that, of course, they rout. But that's why the heavy goblin spears are thought of so highly, not only because they have good damage against certain targets with their AP, but also the fact that they can hold their ground, which is something the Misty Mountains, with all of their ill-disciplined goblins, sorely need. Meanwhile, there's so many javelins and archer fire, well, so many jabs and arrows being traded over on this front. Unfortunately, however, it is going to be in favour of Dale, because Dale simply have got more throwaway troops than the Easterlings, which is not something you sort of see a lot of the time. Dale tends to go with a little bit more of a quality focus rather than their Lake Town units. But here, the numbers have certainly done well for them. Imladris Guardians taking a full frontal assault from the Baltross Trident. So while the engagement for Rune has not been ideal, obviously it wouldn't have been the one he would have chosen ideally, he has managed to do some damage in some areas at the very least. But here, this is going to be pretty nasty. The Dalian cavalry is looking pretty depleted at this point, I think, because they were trying to work their way through Carmel's Shadow Guard. But this is going to be a pretty nice rear charge. Again, the cavalry unit at this point is pretty depleted, but that might still be enough to break this front line. They are Lancers after all, this is what they're meant to do. The Hammer and well, this is certainly going to be enough to break them. The Heru Myro are really, really deadly if they follow through on the charge, which they don't actually. But that's because they don't need to. This front line's already fallen apart. Dale has pretty much got the beating of Rune here. The Scion Rim are trying to hold up, but even a unit as tanky as them is not going to be able to live here. This is the classic combination for Dale, the higher tier front line that you can see, the Elves of Escaroth and the Barding Herd combining their powers together, doing a good job there. So Dale is going to be victorious over here, particularly with the Cav support. We've got some Walk Riders in melee over here against the Dalian Cavalry, which is going to be enough to kill the Dalian Cavalry. The Heru Myro are over here causing absolute havoc in the back lines, going after these archers. Imladris' cavalry, after all, very, very good. But the crossbows are here, and this is the problem again. One of the things that you can often find when you're facing off against the Misty Mountains or Isengard is the fact that they often bring enough crossbows to the point where even if you charge down one of them, another unit of crossbows is going to be able to target you, so you're going to take damage no matter what. And over the long haul here, it may have been more worth their time going after the crossbows than the archers, because the crossbows are the sort of thing which can still turn this battle around if they get into a good position. Vaynar's army has done very well, I must say. Considering they went right into the Lion's Den, taking Imladris head on, they've done very well for themselves. I mean, Arthedain are over here now. I still think Corrigan needs to get in here. Corrigan and Vaynar's army is starting to sort of wrap around. Dismounted Fornost Rain Knights are breaking, and the problem they may have now is the fact that the Imladris cavalry is over here trying to do the business. The Eldar Quinga, a couple of unit models there. There's a lot of heavy goblin spears still around, however, which may be what is sort of convincing Arsal to not charge in, because heavy goblin spears, of course, still very strong. Arthedain here have been in a pretty much constant fighting retreat. Their initial front line of pikes got butchered by ranged units. The Dunedain Peacekeepers are in place, which of course should be able to reasonably hold the line, but the problem is still going to be those ranged units, I think. I think those Snaga skirmishers are out of ammunition. They're going to try and get a side charge into the Arthedain pikes. Here come the Snaga. The Dunedain Peacekeepers are going to try and prevent that, but that is going to leave the door open a little bit, and that could allow the Misty Mountains to start flooding forward. And even Imladris' army is starting to look pretty thin on the ground in terms of numbers. When you go for a very elite army, and you start taking a lot of crossbow and javelin fire, that can be the difference maker. You know, the Misty Mountains took a lot of heavy losses early on, but the Misty Mountains, if any faction can absorb casualties, it's the Misty Mountains. And there goes the Arthedain General. Unsurprising, the Royal Court House Armlaith have been right in amongst it, right from the start, taking range fire from all sources, so unsurprising that Arthedain's General has fallen away. The Dalian Cavalry having to sort of retreat at this point. The Nar Rim, victory seems certain, which is very surprising up against Imladris Guardians, but I imagine that's going to turn around pretty quickly. All of the heavy goblin spears starting to move across. The rain keeps coming down. The Dunedain Peacekeepers are now on the front line. Defeat seems certain for them as well. Which again, it's all of the range fire that's still coming in. You can see that Corrigan's forces in conjunction with what's left of Vaner's skirmishers as well. They're sort of pulling out wide and they're shooting right along the line. The Arthedain Ballista, which we haven't actually seen in action all that much yet, is still online, which could still be a very important part of this battle. There's a very clustered fight over there, of course, and obviously the Ballista are very good at firing down lines. Now we can see that Dale are starting to move in. Now a defensive line needs to be set up here by the Misty Mountains and what's left of Rune. Ooh, and they're going right into the White Brick Fearmongers there. That's a good target. The Carmel's Chosen are coming forward and multiple HP. Heavy infantry unit getting in and amongst things. The Dunedain Peacekeepers are routing, which I think that might come down to the fact that they got hit by a bit of friendly fire. There's also fear-causing units on the front line. It takes a lot to break Dunedain units. They've got good morale. So not ideal there for Arthedain, as their front line is essentially falling apart. And now, the front line used to be pointing this way. Now it's pointing this way. Dale coming to the aid of their allies. Dale actually making up the vast bulk at this point of the blue team's remaining infantry. And unfortunately, a lot of that is Lake Town units, where his numbers sort of really played into his hands when he was facing Rune earlier. That might not be the case anymore if he's going up against quality units like the Carmel's Chosen, backed up by heavy Goblin Spears. The Lake Town units are not really going to be the sort of thing that is required. You can see some of them are already routing, of course, and Lake Town units, morale is not great. And the Fearmongers are nearby, I'm sure they are. And indeed they are, and they cause fear, which will lower the morale of the nearby enemy units. They need to get some elite units on the front line here, I think, the blue team. Otherwise, fear could be what ultimately causes them to collapse. Javelins just pouring in here. The Snaga skirmishers have really been the unsung heroes, I think, in this battle, because they've done a lot of chip damage so far. The Earls of Escaroth are getting in behind the enemy lines, but unfortunately for them, the Bolg's champions are still in perfect health, which is another big factor. The Bolg's champions are going to come in, charging into those Earls of Escaroth. The Earls of Escaroth will take a lot of damage, but they really need to try and do something about the Bolg's champions at this point, because they do essentially hold the same sort of battlefield presence as a unit of knights. A little bit more of an anti-cavalry focus, yes, but they can still wreak havoc. Here, however, the Snaga are now being set upon by the Earls, and the Earls, of course, will very easily chew their way through the Snaga, but in the background you can see, in formation, marching are the White Uruk Fearmongers. And that AP is going to be very nasty for the Earls of Escaroth. They are isolated as well. Defeat is almost certain for the blue team here, and I have to agree, I don't think that Dale has got the gumption to sort of carry this battle through on their own from an infantry standpoint, and I don't think Imladris and Arthedain have got too much more left to give. These heavy Goblin Spears, they are shaken, they need to be routed really. The Gwythi Rockdoor is still a factor in this battle. If they keep charging down more isolated units, you can see here some Imladris sentries trying to get in here. They could kill off a general. Loss of a general could be the sort of thing which sends the Goblins into a bit of a panic. My. There's still a pretty decent chunk of time left in this battle to go, but in spite of their earlier difficulties, Rune, the Carmel's Chosen are now really starting to show their quality in melee, mulching their way through the Dalian front line made of the Lake Town units. Here comes the unit of Lake Town Bowmen, now being engaged in melee as well. The curved scimitars are going to be able to cleave their way through yet more of these Lake Town units. And still this front line. There's still a lot of Lake Town units over here. Dale are also winning just because of sheer weight of numbers. The Blackback Berserkers are over here. You can see that the Earls, it says victory is a distinct possibility, but it immediately flips because of the White Brick Fearmongers. They are stopping the Javelins from actually firing, which is a good thing. The other unit of Earls that was coming over here are just being bullied into submission by the Bolg's champions. The heavy Goblin crossbows are being engaged, but they aren't going to last too much longer. The Goblins pouring through the trees at this point. And this is the real strength of the Misty Mountains. Even after taking a real beating, you're always going to have more manpower. The polar opposite really to playing as the Elves. The Elves early on had such a high quality advantage, but the crossbows and the Javelins helped that front line hold on for long enough, and I think ultimately that may very well not be enough to give the red team the victory here. They do still have Bardian Marksmen in the back, which is still firing. They do still have the Eldar Quinga. There's a Ballista crew, which they could remount. More heavy Goblin Spears. The Imladris sentries are sort of pulling back. They've got some Dunedain Peacekeepers which return from routing, which is the good thing about them routing with a lot of their manpower left is, of course, they will return. And Dunedain Peacekeepers, the sort of units which they will be very pleased to have on the front line. They need to get them in here to start helping out the Lake Town units. The Carmel's Chosen, however, may have pursued too far because they're now a little bit isolated. Absolutely surrounded here by all of these Lake Town units. that wasn't the best charge here. I know what the Gwaithir Rockdor were trying to do there. Charge flush into the Carmel's Chosen. Potentially kill off the Runic General, which Rune's army is small enough to the point where the loss of their General may very well be enough to end the fight. Combination of Barding Herd and Earls of Escroth, but they're depleted though. The Blackback Berserkers and the White Uruk Fearmongers enough. I'm just keeping an eye on the Bulge Champions back here as well, but they need more help. The Lake Town Bowmen are coming in. That is probably the single strongest chunk of infantry that the Reds have left. The Bulge Champions being forced to retreat though, and again, they are still wargs. They may be more heavily armoured and multiple HP, obviously, just like standard wargs, but they still don't want to be under fire for too long. And ultimately there goes the Elven General. Not surprising, I saw him charging into the back of White Uruk Fearmongers, really trying to do his best here to sort of slow the advance of all of these remaining units, which Corrigan has still got a ton of units back here, which I've noticed he tends to do this quite a lot. He tends to leave a lot in reserve, but if ever there was a time to try and swallow your enemies with your sheer weight of numbers, now would be the time. Send them forward to try and break the will of what remains. The Bardian Marksmen are not bad. They do make pretty good makeshift infantry, and they're going to move in to try and sort of really turn the screw on the Runic General. So if nothing else, Dale can certainly have claimed to killed off their hated enemies in Rune. But there's still crossbows, there's still javelins. The Grey Company are coming in, which is good. They need to really make sure that these crossbows stay offline. There's Aragorn, pre-coronation as a ranger, and that's enough to rout them. That's a very good play there by Locomotive, managing to kill off those crossbows. That may be the last thing they do, however, because the Bulge Champions immediately charging into the Grey Company. The Grey Company, very good damage dealers, but not in this way, and the Bulge Champions should be more than enough here to chew them up. But killing off another unit of crossbows is a very worthwhile use of their time. They've already been useful in this battle, so they've certainly paid for themselves, justified their inclusion. And now we can see the Barding Herd, a very depleted unit of them, however. I don't know if the blue team have really got enough manpower to keep this up. There's more Lake Town units. Bardian Marksman over here as well. There's still a lot of Lake Town units. You can see here that the Eldar Quingus, still a lot of range firepower coming in. Gwaithir Rockdor again. There may only be 5 of them, but they just bisect that unit of Goblin infantry. There's still more heavy Goblin halberds. I don't know. I think the Goblin tide is just going to be too strong. Meanwhile, these Goblin infantry, after taking that charge, they're going to be engaged by Lake Town River Patrol. They have to take their victories where they can at this point, the blue team, and continue to chip away at the manpower of the Goblins, which this could be enough to break this unit of Goblin infantry, to be fair. And there goes the Runic General, shanked by the Lake Town infantry. Another nice charge, and they are shaken, and routing may be the best bet here. You can see the halberds forming a sort of square formation, making it very awkward for the blue team to try and use what mobility they have left. Heavy Goblin Spears, and there actually goes the Arthurname Ballista, remounting right through those Heavy Goblin halberds, and that is another thing which the blue team will be very, very thankful for. The Bardian Marksman now getting surrounded once again. AP from the Heavy Goblin Spears coming into play here. And really, you can see the Bulge Champions in the background as well. Corrigan has left a lot in reserve. And I think this may ultimately be... That's a very nice shot though, going right down the Heavy Goblin halberds. The Lake Town River Patrol unfortunately breaking. Yeah, they're not really frontline combatants. And even against Goblin infantry, they simply weren't up to the task. The Ballista has remounted, however, and it's managing to hit basically both units. It's not getting a huge amount of kills, but it's getting kills nonetheless. The Dunedain Peacekeepers are moving forwards. There's still a lot of Lake Town units left, and Dale still has a decent amount of manpower left, but unfortunately I just don't think they've got anything which is going to be capable of defeating Blackback Mountain Berserkers in melee. I also don't think they've got anything which can ultimately stop the Bulge Champions from having their way with whatever stragglers there are here in the backfield. The Snaga Skirmishers, which are now out of ammunition, being committed to melee, helping out the Heavy Goblins, push in on the Bardian Marksman. A nice rear charge there from the Bulge Champions. The Bardian Marksmen are going to come over here potentially to try and trap them, but unfortunately the Bardian Marksmen do rout, unsurprisingly. Here in the middle we also have some Goblin King Bodyguard, 30 of them left alive. Azog's still there. There's another Azog as well. Here we can see the Lake Town Pikemen here in the middle trying to get their pikes down. The support of some bowmen as well, but the Heavy Goblin Spears once again proving why They are so popular. Very, very effective unit to use for the Misty Mountains, and again, very necessary because they're really what the Misty Mountains relies on to sort of hold their lines. The very depleted units of Imladris cavalry still trying to get use of this rid of this one unit of heavy goblin infantry. Routing bowmen, here come the pikes. And I do feel as though, as much as Corrigan was sort of sat back watching his allies sort of move in and then leaving stuff in reserve, I feel as though here in the late game, while Arthedain and Imladris were sort of battered and bruised, they still should have moved forward to be a little bit more proactive in helping Dale. Because Dale's Lake Town units alone were never really going to be able to hold the line. With the support of Imladris sentries and Imladris guardians, even if they're depleted though, that may very well have been a little bit different. Here come the pikes, they're going to move in to try and help the Lake Town pikemen. Ooh, hello. The ballista there going right through the Bolgs champions, not bad at all, but here you can see going to start to work up the line now, and yeah, there goes the Dalian general. I think at this point it's fairly clear that the manpower of the good factions is starting to abandon them. Which, no, in the early engagements I wouldn't have expected that, to be fair. But I feel as though it was over on this side. Vaynar's aggressive push, they actually found some gaps in the enemy lines. They found some gaps and they started to really exploit the gap between Arthedain and Imladris. And then when Corrigan started to feed in their reinforcements as well, it was always going to go well. The crossbows and the javelins. The crossbows and the javelins, which obviously it's difficult to keep track of ranged units like that. But I feel as though they were the reason why the Misty Mountains were able to do what they did, because the heavy goblin spears did hold on the front line for a long time, yes, but they would not have been able to do that without support. The Snaga skirmishers, the heavy goblin crossbows, proving themselves to be MVPs. Dale going for the more quantity-focused approach, which worked initially, enveloping a lot of those runic units. But in the late game, when they needed a little bit more quality to deal with stuff like Blackback Berserkers and White Uruk Fearmongers, they simply didn't have what they needed. And by that point, Imladris and Arthedain had already been pretty well worked over, actually, by the Misty Mountains assault. And again, the Misty Mountains took tons of damage, and they were able to absorb the casualties. Imladris went for a very quality-centric army, and ultimately were not able to do the business. I'm interested to see how the Eldar Atar did, because I'm willing to bet that if there was some Eldar Makar on the front line instead, their line would have been a lot better off. Able to kill off stuff like heavy goblin spears with a little bit more impunity. And Imladris sentries, defeat seems certain. They're now surrounded on all sides as well. The goblins are moving in, and I mean, this does look a bit like the foothills of the Misty Mountains. Goblins victorious. There is the ballista crew getting feasted on by Blackback Berserkers and Bolgs champions. The Dunedain Peacekeepers are over here as well. Defeat is a distinct possibility again, that the nearby presence of the Blackback Berserkers is skewing that. They would certainly be able to beat heavy goblin spears in this context. That might be enough to break them, indeed it is. The Dunedain, not so stalwart today, unfortunately, for the blue team. And the goblins continue to sort of hunt down what remains. I think this unit of Imladris sentries is going to be the last of what remains.
Our allies have fled the field like cowards.
Goblin archers. Yeah, so both of the Imladris supporting armies are gone. Only a few of their units are left alive. The Eldar Quinga coming back, trying to finish off this infernal unit of goblin infantry that Imladris have wants to get rid of for some time, and they may very well be able to do that, as Azog comes in with his Goblin King bodyguard to try and finish them off. Is there a charge going to be coming in? I think so. I think the Bolgs champions are going to charge in here after they've finished off the Imladris sentries with a rout. A charge from the Bolgs champions should be enough to send this unit of Eldar Quinga routing, and that will be the end of this battle. We've seen a lot of the Misty Mountains lately, and we've seen them... Yeah, they lost. They routed. Carnage throughout the battlefield here. You can see where the main epicenter of the battle was. Certainly a very interesting move. So yeah, as I was saying, we've seen a lot of the Misty Mountains lately, and we've seen them both perform very well and very poorly. And this was certainly very well. I feel as though Vayner in particular deserves a good deal of credit for really taking the front foot and finding that gap in the defences of Imladris and Arthedain. Because if Arthedain and Imladris had been able to sort of keep their front lines solid with no way through, it would have been much more difficult. But ultimately, when those gaps were made, when they started to sort of crush over Corrigan started to feed in those reinforcements and it was all over. Rune obviously had a much harder time. They had to deal with obviously all of the knights sort of running roughshod over their skirmishers. You know, the position of Dale was obviously very difficult to overcome. The numbers as well. Dale didn't have the most numbers on the field. That went to Corrigan with nearly 4,000, so definitely a very quantity-focused army from him, which is why they still had so much manpower left at the end. But yeah, ultimately, Imladris obviously by far the smallest army. The most kills on the field, though, did go to Dale, which, again, they got a lot of kills on Rune. They were the most active army in the late game on the blue team. I do feel as though kind of where the blue team maybe missed a trick in this battle was the fact that Arthedain immediately sort of retreated and they formed up not really a nuke box, but there was a bit of tactical geometry going on there. Arthedain sort of trying to move to the flank of Imladris to sort of defend. I feel as though that wasn't really necessary. I feel as though that gave away map control to the red team, which allowed them to get their javelins and crossbows into good positions to fire, which ultimately I do believe that is why the red team ended up winning, because the javelins and crossbows were allowed to do their work. The cavalry for the blue team was also aggressive, but it was also going after targets. You know, it was going after archers, which, you know, fair enough. Getting rid of archers is always going to be a good thing, but the crossbows were the true danger, I think, and the Snaga as well. The Snaga were also allowed to stay in position without really being shot by defending archers as well. You know, Eldar Quinga, a unit of Eldar Quinga is going to be able to kill off a unit of Snaga skirmishers very, very quickly, and that simply didn't happen. Whether because they didn't respect how good the Snaga can be if they're not dealt with. Like the Snaga, they don't have a lot of base damage, but it's still armor-piercing missiles they're throwing in. You need to deal with them, because over a long period of time, they're going to do a lot of damage to pretty much anything. You know, and again, the Imladris have armor, so it works out very well. So I feel as though if Arthedain had maybe tried to hold their ground, maybe tried to skirmish a little bit with Corrigan, because I feel as though that wouldn't have been very definitive either way, which at the very least would have delayed the Misty Mountains from sort of moving in. And I feel as though if Vayner was left to their own devices against Imladris' front line, I feel as though Imladris would have had more success, and obviously Rune would have gone much the same way against Dale. So let's have a little look at seeing what did the damage for Imladris. So we have the Eldar Atar, who, yeah, this is why I don't really like the Eldar Atar. They were only really up against Goblin Infantry and Heavy Goblin Spears, and the one that did best got 126 kills, which is not bad for a frontline unit, but 70 each against a very quantity-focused armies, really, from both the Misty Mountains players is not really good enough. I feel as though the Eldar Makar would have gotten around the 150 mark each on average. Yeah, this is why I don't really like bringing the Eldar Atar. I've never found them useful, really. Not when they were the Linden Long Spears, and not when they're in their current form now. I feel as though Imladris, if you want to go for anti-cavalry options, you have other things you can bring. And usually Imladris likes to be on the front foot when it comes to cavalry anyway, rather than trying to be a little bit more defensive. The Gwythi Rockdor, 222 kills. Good amount of kills throughout the battlefield. I feel as though they and the Elder Enemy Harumairu did okay, but with wargs running around, it was never going to be a completely dominant performance, because crossbows, wargs, that sort of thing, always going to be a good sort of buffer to cavalry to prevent them from just doing whatever they wish, and trolls as well. But the Eldar Quinga doing well, and the Imladris sentries, obviously we've seen the Imladris sentries do extremely well in the past as pikes, and it doesn't surprise me they did well here either. So good performance for them. Overall, good performances from everything. The Noraturno cavalry got shredded as well, simply too lightweight in this sort of context, really, to really be terribly useful. So the Noraturno cavalry and the Eldar Atar maybe should have been traded out for something else. But other than that, the army was fairly solid. Going for more quality against the goblins is certainly not a bad thing. And it could have worked out if, tactically, they had done a few things differently. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed the new reshade. I think that I finally found good settings. Again, I'm maybe a little bit concerned about how it will work out on slightly larger battles. But we'll see. It seemed to work out pretty well here. There was certainly no frame drops, so we're looking good, I think. And big thank you to Arsal, obviously, for sending this one in. And for everyone who says that the blue team always wins, here you go. I'm sure people won't be too impressed that the evil side won in this scenario, but doesn't matter. I mean, again, the blue team lost, so it's not something that happens all the time where the blue team always wins. As for what will happen next, I have a few things that I can choose from. I've got another 3v3 on another map, which is somewhat similar to this, in the sense that it's not a sort of standard field battle. It's on a map called Eton Moors, where there's a bit of a focus around trees again, sort of raised terrain, hidden areas that you can sort of fortify in, or you can be more aggressive in. Maybe having a look at that. We've got a few sieges as well. I've got one on Tol Falas, which I haven't done for quite some time, because obviously I'm trying to sort of spread out the maps that I do as much as I possibly can. And in the upcoming weekend as well, I know that there is some sort of event happening, which again I won't spoil it, too much, but I'm not sure whether I will actually be covering that or not, or whether that will be done by someone else. We'll see. It's all a bit up in the air in a minute, but I will be taking part in that nonetheless, so you can look out for a special event in the very near future. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.